Dear friends, good evening. We are delighted to have you all here with us tonight. In this 26th cultural season, al-Athar al-Islamiyyah introduced a new line of lectures under the title My Experience, where we'll get to know more about individuals or groups who contributed and enriched the cultural scene in Kuwait through their passion, dedication, work, and craft. Tonight, we have Jassim al-Nashmi with his talk titled Renegotiating Identity. In this talk, al-Nashmi traces his journey of bouncing between art, architecture, and furniture, and how his career has been a meandering path rather than a straight one. By negotiating the identity of his region as well as his own through his work, al-Nashmi combines everything he's learned from schools of thought around the world into one practice. Jassim al-Nashmi holds a degree in architecture and urban design from ETH Zurich and Iowa State University, where he spent a semester at London's AA. And he has exhibited artwork in the US, UK, Brazil, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait at galleries and museums like Jameel Art Center and Future Perfect NY, with two collectives, namely What's Your Location and Desert Cast. His works are published on platforms like Design, Design Boom, Wallpaper, Design Milk, and Identity. He has designed projects in US, Kuwait, and Qatar for residential and commercial and governmental clients. al-Nashmi now runs Man-Made Studio, which operates at the intersection of art and design for bespoke and collection pieces, in which he collaborates with local and Arab designers and craftsmen. The studio takes from the designer's globalized experience to translate the contested image of what is Arab, and its focus is on highlighting the contemporary Arab identity through design. Before we start, I'd like to remind you to keep your mobile phones on silent, and let's give a warm welcome to Jassim.
Assalamu alaikum, yatikum al-afiyah. My name is Jassim al-Nashmi, architect and artist and designer. And today, title of the talk is Renegotiating Identity. Because I would like to talk about two things. I mean, you'll see that my identity is kind of dispersed between Kuwait, the UK, the US. And then with my practice, I'm always questioning what is the identity of our region in this modern day and age. And I think this platform of al-Athar al-Islamiyyah is a perfect place to talk about this. We start with the word Iqra, and you'll see a few of these words that are repeated. Iqra means read, and these are kind of pieces of advice that I give to myself, to like younger designers and artists, sometimes I'm writing these pieces of advice from quotes, from books, from people, and it's just a recurring theme. So Iqra is kind of the early stages of studying in university, the profession of architecture. So this is during a class of Architectural History 101. I'm learning about architecture in the US from Americans, surrounded by Americans, and I was learning about all the kind of stages or periods of architecture, periods being in quotations, and one of the periods was Islamic architecture. I was learning about it, but also it was interesting to me to be learning about it in that context, and to me it was very important. Later on, when I got back to Kuwait, to me it was very important to have an issue, qadiyya, and everyone has an issue that they talk about with their work. What is your purpose? So for me it was, where is the lost city of arabesque? When we talk about arabesque, what do we mean? Is this a frozen identity in time, or is this evolving? So to me this was a very important question because of what I've seen in the region related to that style. So starting my studio, I put together a manifesto of what I think is, at least for me, is important. So through design, I want to solve the urban problems we face in our daily lives. And I questioned, what does it mean to be Arab? And obviously this is a very big subject with a lot of theories. But one of them is, the meaning of the word Arab came from the word nomad, that there were tribes that were traveling, constantly changing, constantly adapting to their environment. And I thought this was interesting for our day and age also. Something else important for designers and artists is to recognize that whatever we do is a visual and tactile record of our era. Again, this context of Dar al-Athar is very important because as part of their collection, we see these objects that reference the period that they were in. And I think everyone needs to know that whatever we create is very topical, very important to our era, and it's a representation of it. And so with whatever I create, I try to always represent Arab identity through our characteristics as Arabs. So the roots are what inspire our products, and I try to put together whatever characteristics I think are Arab or what other people try to represent as Arab. And throughout history, there's great examples of architecture, of design, just fascinating elements that I really appreciate. But the interesting thing is a lot of them are presented outside of the Arab world. This is one of the greatest examples, a mihrab from Isfahan in Iran, displayed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And it's a magnificent piece of Islamic art and architecture, and it's represented abroad. And today, in our reality, what we see in our region is completely different. What we see is a mihrab like this. This is a picture of a mosque in Kuwait. It's not represented in the same way, and we're not kind of pushing the boundaries of our heritage in the same way. And to me, it's very interesting and very important to be pushing the envelope. This is another example of architecture in Kuwait. This is just these are a series of a normal Kuwaiti street with normal Kuwaiti homes. And what you see is that these people, as well as most homeowners in Kuwait, are trying to represent their luxury, and the way that they present luxury is through Greek and Roman classical architecture. So we have this stigma that this type of architecture is the most beautiful one. And so we're very used to seeing this in Kuwait as like, oh yeah, this is a normal Kuwaiti home. But these motifs are all coming from this classical architecture. But the way they're created isn't the same as how it was before, which is to get a whole team of stone craftsmen to carve every single frieze and corniche and pediment in this structure. This is another interior, and I think it's not really representing the original identity of wherever it's coming from. It's appropriating itself, but only slightly. You know, this Italian furniture, these Italian chandeliers are very common in Kuwait. And to me, it's fine to be inspired by something else, but I think it's always important to appropriate that thing into your local culture in a design sense. So I felt that an intervention was very important with my practice. So my intervention lies between art, architecture, and design. First thing I did was to create a website to try to put everything that I was working on, and hopefully this kind of gives me a direction. But what you'll be seeing is a lot of art, architecture, and design throughout, and all of them are always asking the same question of how do we represent Arab identity? And these are some things that I was thinking about in the past, like let's say 12 years. Isna', which means to build or to fabricate. Isbur, which means to wait or be patient. Ibhath, which means to research. And ibda', which is to create or be creative. These are a bunch of projects. Some of them are talking about trying to research through Arab identity and heritage. I call these furniture experiments. They're all one-offs. They're all trying out something and trying to achieve a certain identity, message, motif that I find. So that was design projects. Then there's several architecture projects, some that were designed, some that were built, like 360 Mall, Beitek Tower Pavilion, others that were in the design stage, and others that I was managing. That was all in the past couple of years, kind of building experience. Urban design projects, master plans, and art pieces, art installations, earthworks. And after all of that experience, I think I wasn't really trying to push that idea of Arab identity, but rather experiment and eventually reach a stage. So in this stage, a few years ago, is when I built the practice and started to push this idea. I started to look. I started to look a while before, but then it became very important. So undur means look or observe. And again, we go back to this idea of looking at our environment and seeing the vernacular of Kuwait. And this is something typical that we see. And this is when Dubai Design Week asked me and two other designers to represent the Kuwait, design the Kuwaiti pavilion. And the Kuwaiti pavilion, our main question was, okay, what do we represent in a design festival? What is the Kuwaiti design identity? And this became the contemporary one. And this became a very important question because this is what we see when we drive around. So we drove around the factories and we saw that these shapes are extruded from gypsum in a very cheap way. And this is how everyone in Kuwait is able to have a very luxurious looking classical architectural home by extruding them out of gypsum. Again, that's fine, but it would be great if it was appropriated a bit more, to be a bit more Kuwaiti. So, and what is Kuwaiti again? So what we did is to create them, cut them out of foam, cut some of these shapes. So instead of extruding them, they're cut out of foam, and then they were cast into aluminium. And this is when we started to create these sculptures. And every single shape is coming from a motif from a Kuwaiti home. They're all coming from these profiles from the factories in Sabhan. And to us, this is taking it to that next step. First, it was kind of 2D shapes. Then it was here we're making them a bit more organic and coloring them through a chemical process. The title of this exhibition was Towards an Identity. It started in Dubai Design Week, then went to Jameel Art Center, then Scientific Center in Kuwait, then New York, an exhibition in Sharjah, and then the desert in Sharjah, a virtual exhibition, Al-Shahid Park, a proposal for them. And then now there's a collection in Expo 2020 Dubai. These are some of the pieces of the collection. And this is where we're kind of always pushing it. So through art, by designers, we're looking at our heritage, but also appropriating it for our contemporary age. And we think this should happen in every realm of our living. And now I'm going to talk about a few more projects where I'm going to focus on a bit more. So this is after I put together the practice and focused on, with every project, trying to have an initiative. So Badir means be progressive, be proactive, take the initiative. And this is a project that required taking an initiative and not just staying as the designer of the bus stop, but also pushing it legally and trying to make it happen. And these sorts of projects, and also this is taken from the heritage of our architecture in the region, not just building a modern bus stop, but what does a modern bus stop with an Arab identity look like? It's asking these questions, and it's the first street furniture project in my collection, but projects like this are only able to happen with clients that are interested in the same things, that want to push the same ideas. Again, I'm purely an artist and designer, but it needs that other arm to push these projects, and it needs people that believe in the same ideas. This is another project where a client was pushing the same ideas, Sufra's Mihrab in a restaurant. It's a Turkish international cuisine, so we wanted to incorporate Turkish elements, and a very popular element in Turkish architecture is the muqarnas, but over the years it's always been ornate, it's always been extremely decorative. meticulous, and what I wanted to do to make the muqarnas relevant, but still maintain the identity. So it's in 2020, 2021, or 2022, but it's relevant to the design conversation all over the world. Taking the elements from the muqarnas in our heritage, but making it more minimal, more deconstructed. Istami', which means to listen. Listening in general is important for everyone, but listening to the other person's opinion or other ideas was important in this project. So this project was a collection of furniture for a client for their home, and the client is a oud collector. They have a oud collection, beautiful ouds from all over, crafted really well, and the first, it's a whole collection of furniture all over the home. But the main piece was a display case for the oud. Other things are unrelated to the oud, but what we decided is that the concept that is created from the oud applies to all the rest of the furniture. But the concept itself was very hard to create because I kind of don't really know that much about Arabic music. So the client took me we decided to meet the craftsman, a very famous oud craftsman in Kuwait, a Kuwaiti oud craftsman, went to his duwaniya where like his friends sit and he makes the ouds in the same space. And I was really interested in how he creates his pieces. So I asked him, what is your process when you create a new oud? How is one different than the other? And he said, well, when he sits down with someone, his first question is, what color do you want your oud to sound like? And so on and so forth. And I'm like, wait a minute, what do you mean what color do you want the oud to sound like? He's like, well, do they want it to be khokhi, like peachy, or, talking about these different colors. And I'm like, I still don't understand. What do you mean, what color do they want it to sound like? And he was saying, well, between us musicians, it's hard to describe with minimal words what kind of sound they want, so we use color to explain it. And I thought this was really beautiful. And it became the inspiration, because that's his creative process. And that became the creative process for this project. And its title was The Color of Sound, Lon al-Sawt. And that was that's how all the pieces were inspired. The colors that were selected, the materials, the relationship between them were all inspired by structure, by melody, by rhythm. And these are all things that are in Arabic music. So we had the TV media wall, the oud display case here, the desk, and even the outdoor furniture. So here there's a balcony with these large arches, smaller arches for a brunch table, and even a swing set. And another thing that's really interesting about the oud music is that there's always a structure. It's very similar to jazz, actually. There's this structure, and then there's this melodic solo changes within the music. So what we did here is we created a rhythm through the arches that are solid and fixed, but then in between you have this furniture that's always changing. So between all of the pieces, you have these movable seats, these movable backrests, and these movable coffee tables. And depending on how many people you have visiting and how many, where you want them to be placed, it can give you quite a lot of flexibility. So this was really interesting for me to create a whole project inspired by that concept. So they have a completely different life at night. And with this furniture collection, I think this is kind of the start of pushing this idea. Tabassar means to look, to observe, to kind of see, understand the past and predict the future. It's a very interesting word. And last year in September, Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmed passed away, Allah yarhamah. And in the 2 weeks after that, I was looking at what he said to the Kuwaiti population, or just in general. What were his, when I'm usually posting, words of advice from books or from myself or from others, what were his words of advice to certain people, to Kuwaitis? And one of his last speeches was tabassaru. I mean, he starts the speech by saying tabassaru. So he's giving a piece of advice to everyone to be wary of the future. And this was in the beginning of the pandemic. So he's telling people to be careful, to kind of see the future. And the word was inspired by, tabassar. The shape of the typography was by al-basar, al-ain, the eye. And that's how the shape of the typography was formulated, and that was it. It was just a post. And then a year later, half a year later, Al-Hamra Tower wanted to do an exhibition to commemorate the life of Sheikh Sabah. So I submitted this idea, which was a full exhibition design, but I called it Tabassar. And they said that they really liked the design, but they liked the title even more. And they didn't have a title before, or maybe they had one, but they chose the title Tabassar for the exhibition. So this was just a really interesting development from research to design, and then to fruition, to the creation of the idea. And this is an interior architecture project. It's being inspired by our heritage of architecture. And if we look locally in Kuwaiti homes, a lot of the corners of the homes, this is going back to mud architecture. A lot of homes had curved corners. So not like the modern orthogonal sharp corners that we see in most homes, but they curved them because they thought this was more soothing to people living in the home. It's more comfortable to live in a home with curved walls. And that's just something that was incorporated in this space, that when you enter, we're looking from above in a floor plan. And this is someone entering a time capsule. So I called the exhibition a time capsule because I wanted people to enter and feel like they're transported in time, starting from 1929, the birth of Sheikh Sabah, all the way to his unfortunate demise. And it's divided not in increments of 10 years, but rather the milestones of his life. The most important periods when he was Minister of Foreign Affairs, to the Emir of Kuwait, to involving Kuwait in the UN. They're all important milestones, and the whole design was developed by that. So the curved walls create a timeless space. The circle, the curves of the frames of the floor, they're all creating a timeless space. Surrounded by black outside, and then entering and being surrounded by things that don't have corners was an interesting concept in playing with architectural elements. Then there's the project Tarabut, which is, again, kind of trying to push this idea of Arab identity through art. So Tarabut is a installation that was done for Shahid Park in August 2nd last year, which was the 30th anniversary of the Iraqi invasion, August 2nd being the day that the Iraqi forces entered Kuwait. So annually, from the start of Shahid Park, they always do a memorial. And in 2020, I did the memorial for them, which was this installation. And just like we saw before, how I kind of deconstructed the muqarnas in a different way here, I'm taking the skeleton of a muqarnas, and usually we see them in a direct fashion, in one direction, but in this case it's 360. So it's a three-dimensional muqarnas skeleton that was developed into an art piece. And I'm holding two pieces here, and each piece is basically half an arch. And it's representing Shahid, a martyr. And only when you add the other half, only then can you have structure. Before that, the piece would fall. So the idea was to represent tarabut, takatuf, alliance, confluence, the coming together of people through a physical object that will represent this idea. So by shuhada, martyrs, working together, building alliances throughout, Kuwait and the resistance, and alliances in the Gulf and internationally, they were able to increase all of these alliances and become a very stronger group, and were able to overcome the enemy. The idea of representing the martyrs in a very abstract way, but also in a very Arab way that is taken from Arab heritage was very important. And then this is another project. It's called Masallah. And this project is interesting because it started as a design project and developed into an art project. And so it started in a class 10 years ago when in that class we were talking about ritual stations. So what are the rituals that you do at home? And everyone would pick their own ritual. Someone was doing the ritual of eating, someone did sleeping, someone did bathing as a ritual, and I chose prayer as a ritual. And everyone had to develop a station, a space where it would amplify or improve that ritual. While I was doing that, I was exploring this pattern, which is very typical. We've seen it everywhere. But this pattern in particular, from a lot of patterns that I was looking at that were very early in the Islamic art stages, was very appropriate for deconstructing and cutting and putting back together like puzzle pieces. So here, this image is very important to see the pieces separated and then put back together as a puzzle piece. So this is after cutting them, and this is when you connect them all together. And then it can get larger depending on what I'm trying to do. So for this exhibition 10 years ago, the piece, Masallah, became a partition for someone to divide an open space for prayer. It was a design product. And as you can see, it's 2 layers and it's a freestanding wall. So that was 10 years ago. Then this was in Nuqat in 2015, where I made it again and exhibited it one more time. And then this is when, in 2018, in the Mariah Art Center collection. So I created 2 iterations of the piece, and each time I'm developing it. And this was in this past year for Sharjah's Islamic Arts Festival, where I wanted to take it to the next level. But this festival is an arts festival, not a design festival or exhibition. So I wasn't trying to create the piece as a design product, but rather to push its limits of the concept of these pieces becoming puzzle pieces. Because the idea of Islamic ornamentation started when Muslim artisans were trying to represent God, Allah, in His certain characteristics. So they chose the most, clear characteristics, which are the Almighty or the Infinite. So the Islamic ornamentation became something that is infinite and can keep going unless a border is added. And to me, this idea was very interesting. Also, the idea of the theory of atomism, نظرية الذرية, which is talking about an atom. The theory talks about an atom that depends on all the atoms that are around it. And without those atoms, it can't survive. And this is something else that the Islamic ornamentation represents, which is that every single piece is connected to several pieces all around it. And that's talking about our society, being that each person can't survive on their own. They depend on the people around them to survive and be stronger. And these pieces became very, very strong when they became connected to a lot of other pieces. And I thought that was really beautiful. So this is in the past month in Sharjah Art Museum. And before, the piece was a divider for dividing a space for prayer. And in this case, it was a threshold, a doorway, a passageway for prayer. So it became an arch because in this case, before it was out of wood and then it was out of aluminum, and I was able to take it to the next level. Again, always trying to push the boundaries of Arab art and design. This is another installation, but also done for the same festival last month, and it's still there in Khorfakan, in a city in the UAE. Very beautiful mountainous area, looking out, overlooking the sea. And before it was, first it was a divider. Masallah was a divider, then it was a passageway, and in this case it was a walkway. where someone would enter and walk around, and as they're walking through, the pieces are getting taller. So this is where they're very short, and they get taller and taller and taller to the tallest spiraling piece in the middle, and that's where you get the most shade. And so in this very beautiful mountainous area, someone is able to be in a calm space, semi-private, secluded, in solitude. So that was the idea for this piece. As you'll see, it's right opposite this beautiful amphitheater that's carved into a mountain. So it's a very popular location. So it's dealing with this, activity. Lastly, tahadda, which means challenge or challenge yourself. In my case, I'm challenging myself with my practice to always be working on ideas, projects that are kind of diverse. Sometimes, growing from a small product to a larger one. So I started with these products that are, retail items. This one is a card holder, and it's the size of, a fraction of my pinky. And that's one of the first pieces. And the idea was always to be developing, and the pieces are always, slightly getting larger, but always to be exploring this idea of Arab identity through every piece. And the name of the studio is man-made because man-made doesn't have a size, a scale. It could be something microscopic to a city scale. So the name was supposed to negotiate all these scales that are talking about something specific, which is always pushing the envelope of Arab design and art. So I'd like to end with just two quick stories that I thought were interesting to me. The first story was in a chain email during the kind of Hotmail period. So there was this story on a Hotmail email that I got when I was young, and I thought it was interesting. It's talking about this old lady in the Netherlands who lives on a farm, and she has a big field, just like most farms. And every day she gets back from work and she plants one seed in her garden. These are tulip seeds. She plants one of these holes, so there's 9 seeds at once. And she just plants it and then goes away, and then comes back the next day and plants another and then goes away. And it's very, very tiring work, very relentless. And at the end, she's planted quite a lot. Usually this work is done by a whole army of gardeners, a whole team of gardeners. And I don't know if you know about the Netherlands, they have this tulip season where people from all over go to the Netherlands to see the tulips in full bloom. And this old lady would do this every single day, just one group of seeds and then move on. And then at the end, during the bloom season, she had a whole field of yellow tulips, just like a lot of the other farms that had whole teams. So to me, this was very interesting that, she was doing it day by day. Anyone can achieve something that looks impossible to be done by one person, but step by step, it is actually possible. Another story I thought was interesting was the domino effect, which we're used to seeing in this format, because dominoes are usually the same size, right? But actually, what's interesting in physics in general is that an object half the size of another can topple it. So I can topple something double my size, and then something else can topple something else that's double its size. So if you think about it, this very tiny domino that he's knocking over with a pencil is, in effect, knocking over this massive tower that is 100 or 1,000 times its size. And to me, this was interesting with the concept of challenge and challenge yourself. Is that you can always be challenging, taking on a challenge that is maybe your size, maybe a little bit bigger, but the next challenge can be double its size, and the next one can be double that, and eventually you can reach heights that you never knew were possible. And with that, we persist, we proceed, istimir, nastimir, meaning we proceed, we persist, we push on, we keep moving forward, is one of, again, one of the main pieces of advice that I've learned about that are very useful to whenever someone's trying to pursue something large. Thank you very much.